Callum Drest noticed the smoke before he noticed anything else. It rose from the tree line on the far edge of his property, thin and gray against the November sky, the kind of smoke that meant a fire too small to be a campfire and too deliberate to be an accident. Callum had lived alone at Heron's Reach for 11 years, and in 11 years, no one had ever built a fire on his land without asking. No one had ever come to Heron's Reach at all. Not really. Not since the accident that had swallowed the best part of his life and left him with nothing but the farm and the silence it offered. He pulled on his coat and walked toward the smoke. The property sat 3 kilometers outside of Dunmore, a small farming town in southern Alberta, where the winters came early and stayed long. Callum had bought it young, when his wife Vera was still alive, and their plans for it stretched out like a road with no end. They had talked about horses, a kitchen garden, a daughter who would grow up smelling like hay and river mud. Then a truck had run a stop sign on the highway outside of Lethbridge, and all of those plans had simply stopped, like a clock whose battery had been pulled. Callum had buried Vera in the spring and kept working the land through the summer because he did not know what else to do, and summer had turned to fall, and then to winter, and then the years had folded over on themselves, and he was 43 years old and still had not figured out what came next. The smoke led him to the hollow beside the old irrigation ditch where the cottonwoods grew close together and the ground stayed damp even in October. She was sitting with her back against a tree, her legs drawn up to her chest, a small fire burning in a ring of stones she had clearly built herself. Her coat was dark green and too thin for November. Her dark hair was loose around her face. She had a cut above her left eyebrow that had bled down her cheek and dried there, rust-colored against pale skin. Beside her on the ground sat a canvas bag, held shut with a piece of electrical wire twisted tight. She looked up when she heard him coming and did not run. That was the thing Callum noticed first. She did not run. "This is private land," he said, not unkindly. "Just stating a fact." "I know," she said. "I'm sorry. I needed to stop." Her voice was steady for someone sitting on frozen ground with dried blood on her face. Callum stood there a moment looking at her. She looked back at him without flinching, which told him something. People who flinched were either guilty or afraid, and she was neither. She was something else. Something that had been afraid for so long it had worn itself smooth. "You need that scene too," he said, meaning the cut. "I'm fine. You're bleeding." "Was bleeding," she corrected. It stopped. Callum looked at the bag she was guarding. She noticed him looking and put her hand over the wire clasp. "I'm not going to take your bag," he said. Something shifted in her face. Not trust, not yet, but the edge of it. "Come inside," he said. "There's a kettle on." She didn't move right away. She studied him the way a person studies a door they aren't sure will hold their weight. "I know who you are," she said finally. "You're Callum Drest. You used to sell grain to Henry Marsh's co-op." Callum nodded. "People in town say you keep to yourself." "I do." "Why are you inviting me in then?" Callum looked at the fire she had built, neat and careful, the stones arranged just so. He looked at the bag she was protecting. He looked at her face and the blood dried on it, and the steadiness in her eyes that had cost her something to maintain. "Because it's cold," he said. "And you built a good fire, which tells me you know how to take care of yourself. And you didn't run when I came, which tells me you're not hiding from your own conscience." She stared at him for a long moment. Then she put her hand on the ground and pushed herself to her feet. Her name was Vane, and she told him so in his kitchen while he put the kettle on and found the tin of first aid supplies in the cabinet above the sink. 31 years old, originally from Red Deer, had been living in Dunmore for the past 2 years working at the textile mill on the edge of town. "The mill that Prentice owns," Callum said. He did not say it as a question. Iris was sitting at his kitchen table with a cloth pressed to her eyebrow. She looked up at his tone. "You know him?" "I know of him," Callum said carefully. Douglas Prentice owned half of Dunmore and was quietly working on acquiring the other half. He sat on the town council, donated money to the agricultural fair every August, and had a handshake that lasted a second too long. Callum had sold grain to his operation twice and refused a third contract when Prentice had asked him to sign a clause allowing the man to dictate what Callum planted the following season. That had been 4 years ago. Prentice had not spoken to him since. "What happened to your face?" Callum asked. Iris was quiet. The kettle began to whistle, and he poured the water over the tea without looking at her, giving her the privacy of his back while she decided. "There's a ledger," she said finally. Callum set the mugs on the table and sat down across from her. "At the mill, there are 2 sets of accounts," Iris said. "One that goes to the government auditors, one that doesn't. I found the real one 3 months ago. I wasn't looking for it. I was looking for a supply invoice in the back office, and the file was mislabeled, and I opened it by accident." She looked at her hands. "But once you've seen something, you can't unsee it. What was in it?" Iris looked up at him. "Wage theft," she said. "Systematic. For 9 years. Workers are being docked for shortfalls that don't exist. Women on the line, mostly, because they're less likely to complain and more likely to need the work." Her jaw tightened. 42 current employees. I counted. "Did you go to the labor board?" "I went to Regional Inspector Gordon Pell." She said the name the way you say a word in a language you've decided you no longer want to speak. "He told me the accounts were a private business matter and that it wasn't the place of a mill worker to be going through management files." Her eyes didn't waver. "He also told Douglas Prentice that I'd been in his office." Callum was quiet. "That's when it started," Iris said. "Small things first. My locker was broken into. My time card disappeared twice, so my pay was delayed. Then last week, 2 men I didn't recognize came to my apartment building. My landlord told me afterward they were asking questions about my character." She touched the cut above her eyebrow carefully. "This morning, someone ran me off the road on the Mackenzie Highway. I left my car in the ditch and I walked." "You walked from the Mackenzie Highway?" 14 kilometers, she said without particular emphasis, as though it were simply a fact about the morning. Callum looked at the canvas bag on the floor beside her chair, its wire clasp still twisted shut. "The ledger," he said, "is it in the bag?" Iris looked at him steadily. "I photographed every page. The photos are in there." She paused. "The original is somewhere safe." "Where?" For the first time, a small, careful smile moved across her face. "Somewhere safe," she said again. Callum wrapped his hands around his mug. Outside the kitchen window, the November light was already going gray. He thought about what it cost a person to walk 14 kilometers in a November morning and then sit calmly at a stranger's kitchen table and explain their own undoing without their voice breaking. He thought about Vera and how she had always said that the bravest people weren't the ones who weren't afraid. They were the ones who were afraid all the way through and kept going anyway. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "The guest room hasn't been used in a while, but the bed's fine." Iris shook her head. "I don't want to bring this to your door." "It's already at my door," Callum said. "You're sitting at my kitchen table." She looked at him, that steadiness again behind the wariness. "I don't know you," she said. "No," Callum agreed. "But you know I kept to myself for 11 years, and nobody in town has a bad word to say about me. Or you wouldn't have come this direction when you were walking." He met her eyes. "You chose this farm for a reason." Iris was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached down and picked up her bag and held it in her lap, both arms around it, the way you hold something you know the weight of. "One night," she said. "One night," Callum agreed. He was cleaning up the kitchen when the headlights swept across the window. Callum turned off the overhead light and moved to the side of the window, looking out. A dark truck was idling at the end of his lane. He watched it for a full minute. It didn't pull in, it didn't leave. It just sat there, headlights on, engine running, the way a man sits outside a house when he wants the people inside to know he's there. Callum went to the hallway. Iris was already standing at the top of the stairs, her bag in her hand. "How long has that truck been there?" she asked. "Just pulled in." Her face was composed, but her knuckles were white around the bag's strap. "They found me faster than I expected," she said, more to herself than to him. "Come down," Callum said. He took her to the back of the house, to the old root cellar his father had built into the hillside when the farm was first broken. The entrance was behind the woodpile, a low door with a wooden latch, and the space inside was deep and dry, running back a good 10 meters under the hill. He had not used it in years. It smelled like earth and old apples. "There's a lantern on the shelf to the left," he said. "Matches beside it." Iris looked at the low door, then at him. "I don't like small spaces," she said flatly. "I know," Callum said. "I'm sorry." She looked at him for a moment. Then she pushed open the door and went inside. Callum went back to the front of the house and turned the kitchen light back on and put the kettle on again, because that was what a man did at home alone at 9 in the evening. A few minutes later, there was a knock at his door. 2 men stood on his porch. One was broad-shouldered and wore a Dunmore feed co-op jacket that Callum didn't recognize him from. The other was leaner, older, with a dark wool coat and the careful stillness of a man accustomed to being obeyed. That one Callum recognized. Regional Inspector Gordon Pell. "Evening," Callum said. "Mr. Drest," Pell said pleasantly. "Sorry to bother you. We're looking for a woman named Iris Vane. Dangerous individual. There's been a complaint filed against her for theft of proprietary business documents." Callum kept his face neutral. He had spent 11 years keeping his face neutral. "Haven't seen anyone," he said. Pell's eyes moved past him into the kitchen. 2 mugs on the table. Callum silently noted the error and did nothing about it because doing something about it would confirm the error. Pell's gaze came back to Callum. "You live alone out here." "I do. Must get lonely. I manage 2 mugs." Pell said, still pleasant. "I had a mug in the living room earlier," Callum said. "I carried it out when I heard your truck." He paused. "I hear engines out here at night. I tend to pay attention." Pell looked at him for a long moment, with the expression of a man who was deciding whether to keep being pleasant or stop. "She's been spreading damaging lies about a good man," Pell said. "Douglas Prentice has built a great deal for this community." Callum thought of 42 women whose wages had been quietly stolen for 9 years. "I'm sure he has," he said. "If you see her," Pell said, handing Callum a card with a number on it, "give me a call." "Of course," Callum said. He watched the truck pull out of the lane and waited until the tail lights disappeared before he let out the breath he'd been holding. He gave it another 20 minutes before he went back to the root cellar. Iris was sitting on an old crate, with the lantern lit and the bag in her lap and her back straight, the way a person sits when they are determined not to let a small dark space defeat them. "They're gone," Callum said. She nodded. She didn't ask what had been said. She already knew. "Gordon Pell came personally," she said. "That tells me they're more afraid than I thought." "Or more connected," Callum said. "Both," she said. She looked at him in the lantern light. "You lied for me." "I didn't lie," Callum said. "I have had 2 mugs in 2 rooms, that's a true thing." A sound came from Iris then, quiet and surprised. That was almost a laugh. It changed her face completely, for just a moment, before the wariness came back. "You're careful with words," she said. "I'm careful with most things," Callum said. "Come inside. You shouldn't sit on that crate all night." She followed him back into the house. He made soup from what was in the pantry, canned tomatoes and a bit of stock, nothing complicated, and they sat at the kitchen table with the light low and ate without saying much. It was the first time in longer than he could accurately count that Callum had cooked for someone else, and the strangeness of it was not unpleasant. After a while, Iris said, "You had something in that room upstairs off the hallway, a child's drawing, framed on the wall." Callum was quiet. "I wasn't prying," she said quickly. "I just saw it through the door when I was coming down the stairs. It's all right." "Her name was Vera," Callum said. He stopped and corrected himself. "My wife's name was Vera. The drawing was hers. She made it when she was a girl and she kept it her whole life." He looked at the window. "She liked drawing horses. She wasn't very good at it, honestly. The proportions were always wrong. He paused. I kept it because the proportions being wrong was the thing she thought was funny about it. She used to point it out to people. Look at this horse. Something has gone terribly wrong with this horse. Iris looked at him. Her eyes were very still. She sounds like she was wonderful, she said. Callum looked at the table. She was, he said simply. Neither of them said anything for a while after that. The November wind moved against the house, and the soup cooled in the bowls, and the kitchen held them both without asking anything of them, which was, Callum thought, the best thing a room could do. In the morning, Iris sat at the table with the photographs spread out in front of her, organized by date, each one labeled in a small, precise hand in the corner. She had been up before him. He had come downstairs to find her already there, the photographs arranged, a piece of paper beside them where she had been making notes. You document well, he said. I was an admin clerk for 6 years before I went to the mill, she said. I know how to organize paper. She looked at him. I also know what admissible evidence looks like and what doesn't. Prentice's lawyer will argue these are out of context. We need the original ledger. She paused. And we need someone who can read it who won't be paid to look the other way. The labor board, Pell controls who gets assigned to Dunmore complaints. She shook her head. We need to go above Pell, federal level. That takes time, Callum said. I know it takes time, she said. But Prentice is running the next cycle of payroll deductions in 2 weeks. 42 people, Callum. She said his name without thinking about it, and then she noticed that she had, and a faint color came into her face. Sorry, she said. Mr. Drest. Callum is fine, he said. He sat down across from her. Tell me who has the original. Iris hesitated. You came to my land, Callum said. You let me hide you in a root cellar. You ate my soup. He paused. Tell me who has the original ledger. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, Doris Lennox. Callum blinked. Doris Lennox, the retired schoolteacher. She's also my landlord's mother, Iris said. She's 81 years old. She has never once in her life been intimidated by anyone, and she keeps the original in a waterproof case inside her cedar chest behind her winter coats. She met his eyes. Prentice would never think to look there. He doesn't take elderly women seriously enough to be afraid of them. Callum thought of Doris Lennox, who had taught every child in Dunmore under the age of 50, and who had once, according to town legend, told the mayor of Dunmore at a public meeting that he had the manners of a badly raised poodle and the strategic sense to match. No, he said slowly. No, he wouldn't. Iris almost smiled again. She's waiting to hear from me. If I don't contact her by tomorrow morning, she delivers the ledger herself to the RCMP detachment in Lethbridge. Callum sat back. You set up a dead man's switch. I set up a plan, Iris said. Doris and I set it up together the day after I left the mill. She looked at the photographs, but the photos alone aren't enough. I need someone credible to stand with me when I walk into that RCMP detachment. Callum looked at her. Why me? Iris was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Because you've been farming this land for 11 years without anyone having a single dishonest word to say about you. Because when Gordon Pell came to your door last night, you looked him in the eye and you didn't sweat. And because, she stopped. Because, Callum said, because you're the only person I've met in this town who didn't vote with his eyes when he looked at me, she said. Everyone in Dunmore looks at me like I'm either a problem or a liar. You looked at me like I was a person who'd had a bad morning. Callum thought about that for a moment. You had a very bad morning, he said. I did, she agreed. He stood up and went to the coat rack by the door and took down his good coat, the one he wore to Lethbridge, the one that still smelled faintly of Vera's cedar sachets, because he'd never had the heart to air it out properly. I'll drive, he said. She looked at him. Just like that? You've been careful and thorough, and you've thought 3 moves ahead of everyone trying to stop you, Callum said. And 42 people are having their wages stolen. He pulled the coat on. What else is there to say about it? Iris looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face that was not the wariness and not the steadiness, but something underneath both of them. Something older and more tired and more hopeful than either. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Callum said. "Get your bag." They drove to Dunmore first. Iris waited in the truck while Callum went to the door of Doris Lennox's small house on Birchwood Street, and Doris, a small, straight-backed woman with white hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades at the front of a classroom, looked at him through the storm door with an expression of calm assessment. "You're Callum Drest," she said. "I am," he said. "Vera McAllister's husband," she said. "She was one of mine, you know. Grade 4 and grade 6, both. Lovely girl. Terrible at horse drawings." Callum felt something move in his chest that he had not expected. "She was," he said, his voice steady with effort. "Yes." Doris looked at him a moment longer. Then she said, "I'll get the case." She came back with a flat metal case, locked with a simple padlock, and handed it through the storm door. "Tell Iris I said to go right at those people and not to slow down," Doris said. "And you," she pointed a small firm finger at him, "you make sure she doesn't have to do it alone." "Yes, ma'am," Callum said. It came out naturally, the way it would have come out when he was 9 years old. Doris made a sound of approval and shut the storm door. Callum drove to the truck and handed Iris the case through the window. She took it in both hands and held it against her chest. She said, "Go right at them," Callum said. "Of course she did," Iris said. Her voice was rough at the edges in a way it hadn't been before. They were on the highway to Lethbridge when Iris said, "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead. Why did you stay?" "After Vera died, you could have sold the farm. You could have left." Callum kept his eyes on the road. The highway stretched flat in both directions, the sky pale blue above it, the fields brown and resting on either side. For a while, he said, "I stayed because I didn't know where else to go, and after that I stayed because—" He paused. It had been a long time since he had tried to put this into words. "She loved that land," he said. "She would walk out in the evenings when the light was long and just look at it, not doing anything, just looking." He was quiet for a moment. "I used to think I was staying for her sake, that I was keeping it going because she would have wanted that." He watched the road. "I think now maybe I was staying because the land itself was something she had loved, and standing on it was the closest I could get to." He stopped. "To still being known by her," Iris said quietly. Callum didn't answer. He didn't have to. They drove in silence for a while. The fields went past, brown and resting, waiting for spring. "She would have liked that drawing being on the wall," Iris said. "The horse with wrong proportions." "She chose that spot herself," Callum said. "Spent 20 minutes deciding." "Sounds about right," Iris said. "And somehow she said it the way someone says it about a person they would have known." And Callum felt the particular strangeness of grief, which was that people you lost kept introducing themselves to others in little fragments. Long after they were gone. The RCMP detachment in Lethbridge was a low building with a Canadian flag above the door and fluorescent lights in the waiting room that made everyone look slightly unwell. Callum sat beside Iris at the desk and did not say much, because he was not there to say much. He was there to be a body in a chair, a farmer from Dunmore who had known these roads his whole life and who was vouching, with the weight of 11 quiet years, for the woman beside him. The officer who took their statement was a corporal named Burt, a careful woman in her 40s who wrote everything down and asked questions that told you she had already understood the shape of what she was hearing. Iris laid out the photographs in order. She laid out her timeline. She spoke clearly and without drama, the way you speak when the facts are enough and you don't need to embellish them. She named Gordon Pell and what he had said in his office. She named the date her car had been run off the road. She set the metal case on the desk and watched Corporal Hebert open it and look at the original ledger. Hebert turned a page, then another. Her expression did not change, but her writing got faster. When Iris was done, Hebert looked at her. "This is comprehensive," she said. "I know," Iris said. Hebert looked at Callum. And you witnessed the incident with Inspector Pell at your property last night. I spoke with him at my door, Callum said. Yes. Will you provide a written statement? That's why I came, Callum said. They were there for 4 hours. When they came out into the afternoon, the light was already going low in gold, the November light that pressed itself flat against the prairies and made everything look briefly ancient. Iris stood on the steps of the detachment and let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs. It's not over, she said. No, Callum agreed. Prentice has money. He has lawyers. He'll drag it out. He will, Callum said. But he doesn't have the ledger anymore. Iris looked at him. Her face was tired and clear, the way a face looks after you've put something heavy down. You said you don't go into Dunmore much, she said. I don't. If this goes to a hearing, they'll need me there. She paused. And I'll have to be in Dunmore while I wait. I don't have a car, and my apartment is. She stopped. I'd rather not go back to my apartment for a while. Callum looked at the sky. The sun was going down behind the Rockies, the mountains a dark edge against the last of the light. There's a second bedroom, he said. It's quiet out there. Quiet might be useful while you wait. Iris was still for a moment. I keep bringing things to your door, she said. You brought 42 people's stolen wages to my door, Callum said, and a retired schoolteacher with strong opinions. I think I can manage. She looked at him for a long time. There was something in her expression that was not quite a smile, but it was pointing in the direction of one. You're very strange, she said. You know that. My wife said the same thing, Callum said. She meant it as a compliment. So do I, Iris said. They drove back toward Dunmore in the dark, the highway unwinding ahead of them. The fields invisible on either side but present, the way land is present even when you cannot see it. Iris fell asleep somewhere past the turnoff. For Picture Butte, her head tipped against the window, her bag still on her lap. Callum drove carefully, the way he always drove on this road in the dark, with the attention of someone who knew how fast the weather could change out here on the open plain. He thought about Gordon Pell's face at the door. He thought about 42 women and 9 years of quietly stolen wages and a ledger that a 31-year-old mill worker had walked 14 kilometers in a November morning to protect Munn. He thought about Doris Lennox handing him a metal case through a storm door. He thought about a child's drawing of a horse with wrong proportions, hanging in the hallway of a house that had been quiet for 11 years. He thought about how a person could spend a long time believing they had nothing left to offer anyone, and then one morning they could walk towards smoke rising from their tree line, and it could turn out they were wrong. When they reached Heron's Reach, the house was lit in the yard lamp, the way he had left it. Iris woke when he turned into the lane, startled and briefly bewildered, and then she recognized where she was. She looked at the house, at the lit window, at the familiar shape of the property in the dark. It looks like home, she said, before she seemed to think about what she was saying. Callum didn't answer. He just pulled the truck up to the house and cut the engine. They went inside. He put the kettle on. She set the bag down on the table and sat down in the chair she had sat in the night before. And the kitchen settled around both of them the way a kitchen will. Somewhere out in Dunmore, the process had begun, and it would be slow and difficult, and Prentice would fight every step of it, because men like Prentice always did. But Corporal Hebert had the ledger now, and the photographs, and the names, and Iris's careful timeline, and a written statement from a farmer who had sat in that detachment for 4 hours and spoken without hesitation. And Doris Lennox was waiting by her phone, 81 years old and entirely unafraid. The kettle came to a boil. Callum made the tea and set a mug in front of Iris and sat down across from her, and for a while they just sat there together, not saying anything in particular, which is a thing that requires a certain kind of trust between two people, and which neither of them took lightly. Outside, the November wind moved across the fields of Heron's Reach. The land lay still and cold and patient under the dark. and inside the kitchen of a house that had been a place of mourning for a long time. Something that was not yet happiness but was reaching in that direction sat down quietly and made itself at home.